The House finally passed legislation to increase the minimum wage. Now, in a party line vote, 231 to 199, you had Democrats, the Democratic controlled House, pass a living wage bill. Now, the legislation is a compromise between centrist Democrats and more progressive members who had debated how large the hike should be. Now, $15 an hour, that is basically the minimum, the living minimum that you can live on in most of the country without having to go on federal assistance. It's about $30,000 a year. That's not a lot of money. Now, some other points that they disagreed on is whether it would rise with the same level across the country, which I believe it should. It should be tied to inflation, and whether or not there should be flexibility. Now, progressives won the battle for enacting a wage hike to $15 an hour across the country, reports The Hill, while centrists succeeded in lengthening the time period for the extension from 5 to 6 years. The legislation also includes an amendment requiring that its economic impact be studied as the wage hike is phased in. I'm actually not opposed to that. I know that's a centrist measure, right? But, we need to have a study on if the minimum wage is, what's going to happen if we have the minimum wage. Well, we already kind of know what's going to happen. We can look at the cities that have already put in a living wage situation. And you can look at Seattle. You can look at, California, right? LA, I should say. And you can see San Francisco. So now the thing about it, some of those cities, of course, is the cost of living is so high already that this minimum wage not going to have as much of an impact as it would have in some places like, the middle of Pennsylvania, Michigan, etc. Nonetheless, right? So now this comes after a Congressional Budget Office report that projected that a hike would lift about 1.3 million people out of poverty. Now, the report also warned that it's possible that you could lose 1.3 million jobs by 2024. Now, what's not being reported in The Hill is that 17 million people would also see a bump in their rate, in their pay rate. So you have 1.3 million people out of poverty, 17 million people see a raise, with, of course, those economic effects built in. Now, there's a possible cost of maybe 1.3, maybe probably less, right? Now, the reason I say maybe is not because I don't care about facts, right? No, I actually do care about facts. And so that's why there are numerous studies I want to point out that show that a minimum wage increase to $15 an hour would actually not have a huge impact on jobs. In fact, there's a recent one from Berkeley that found that there was no negative nor really all that big of a positive effect on on jobs when you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So they didn't see huge job gains, but they also didn't see the disastrous job losses that Republicans always warn about when you raise the minimum wage. Speaking of Republicans, Representative Michael Burgess made this argument during the debate that this legislation would raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, a 107% increase over the current rate of $7.25 an hour. So now the reason that he said that, right, is first he wants to point out, oh my God, look at that, 107%. That is an enormous hike. Oh my God, radical leftists, right? But also, he said this, quote, an increase of this magnitude could harm American businesses, same thing they say all the time, could harm American consumers. Weird, more people having money somehow ends up in consumers being hurt. Oh, you understand, they're going to pass the cost on to the consumer. Well, there have been other studies that have shown that after there have been, basically wage hikes in the minimum wage, that yes, some costs do increase, but it's spread out so much that it actually ends up being less than a few cents. So your hamburger is not going to go up to $10 an hour, $10 for a Big Mac. It's going to go up by maybe less than 10 cents. So now it also says that he says that it will certainly harm American workers. maybe the ones that possibly lose their job, if that happens, which there's no evidence to prove that it does. Even the CBO report was super, super conservative. But it will hurt. It will help so many more people, right? And get this, Burgess also says, quote, it has the potential to leave nearly 4 million workers unemployed. 4 million. 4 million. Where did he get that number? Again, the CBO said it's a possibility that 1.3 million could lose their jobs. This guy's like, 1.3? No. We're going to say 4 million. So basically, oh, you're only going to help 1.3, but you're going to hurt 4 million. Oh, look at all that. And again, they ignore that 17 million people would see a definite raise in their wages. And again, there are economic benefits associated with that. But says, no, 4 million. I'm going to pull that out of my butt. And look, it's probably some right-wing think tank that came up with that number. And that think tank probably funded by giant corporations. Well, let's be honest. But look, here's the thing, right? So now the conservative argument here is, look, we don't need a minimum wage. It can stay low. And what's going to happen is if you grow the economy organically and corporations are successful, then they're going to share their profits with the workers. Capitalism, right? When you have more at the top, it will trickle down to the rest of the workers and they will see increased wages. Now, here's the thing. We are in the middle of what economists call a booming economy, right? You have corporations posting record profits. They're doing incredibly well. Stock market's up, and yet, at the same time, wages have not risen. They remain fairly flat when you factor in inflation, right? So a couple of modest, tiny little bumps here and there when it comes to wages, but generally, they're pretty stagnant. Now, again, Republicans claim that, hey, look, when the wealthy and corporations do better, then everybody does better. Well, that's not true. That's not true. In fact, Burgess complains about the minimum wage increase being a whopping 107%. An increase of that magnitude. Oh my God, it's so huge. Well, let me give you a huge number. All right. Since 1978, CEO compensation has risen by more than 930%. You want to talk about 107% increase for the workers at the bottom, making minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, with starvation wage. Well, then why don't you look at the top and see that, 930%. Wow, that's pretty big for CEO compensation. I know what they'll say. Oh, but Jeff, they deserve that. They work for that. And so, look, you got to have high CEO compensation, or you're not going to attract top talent, right? Whereas these other jobs, nobody cares about those, right? Well, the workers do. And people who, go to these restaurants and, get served by people making minimum wage, they actually care. American people actually care. So, look, overall point is somebody is doing well in this economy and it's not workers. All those gains have gone to the top. And so a minimum wage increase is a way to kind of try to redress some of that balance, that imbalance. So now, of course, most Republicans voted against it. I think only 4 Republicans backed this legislation, which is kind of amazing. 4 Republicans voted in favor of this, but 6 Democrats voted against it. Let me give you their names. Anthony Brinsky of New York, Joe Cunningham of South Carolina, Kendra Horn of Oklahoma, Ben McAdams of Utah, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, and I cannot say this person's name. Torres Small of New Mexico voted no. I'm sorry, I cannot say that word. I can't figure out how to pronounce that, so I'm not going to try. So now those 6 voted against raising the minimum wage, and I'd very much love to hear the reasons why. And the reason is, of course, look, if it's a good reason, like, hey, man, look, I don't know if my constituents would be in favor of this, or, oh, maybe it's too conservative, right? Basically, what I'm saying is that if we don't like the answer to that, then you're probably going to get primaried. In fact, look, this is a slam dunk of legislation. I mean, a Hill Harris X poll taken back earlier this year found that 55% of registered voters said that they would support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. 73% of Democrats and 53% of independents, they say raise the wage, $15 an hour. Now, Republicans, of course, Republicans are mainly against this, right? And they do not want to take out the legislation in the Senate. For me, I say get them on the record, right? They're against you making better wages. It's simply, they are. They're not in favor of you making, if you make minimum wage, making a better wage. They want you to rely on the generosity of your employer, who may not be very generous. So I say to Democrats, look, it's election season coming up. Run ads. Republicans don't want you making a living wage. Republicans want giant corporations to keep funneling money to overpaid executives. Slam dunk. Hammer them on that issue. This is a very important economic issue because everybody knows it. Everybody sees that in their paychecks, right? And if you show people that Republicans are the party of the rich, well, you might actually have a chance at winning. So long as, of course, you're not the party of the rich. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.